I am the sun and the air of a shyness that is criminally vulgar. I am the sun and air of nothing in particular. You shut your mouth, how can you say you go about things the wrong way? I am human and I need to be loved just like everybody else does. That's good, Keith.
I don't know how long we could go on with that. Welcome to Burdock Radio. My name is Keith Costed. I am the producer of this show. The things you will hear over the next 55 minutes or so, 53 minutes now, represent the views of Burdock Radio and the people making them. All opinions and quotations in no way represent the Wiffle West Radio and the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. Wiffle West Radio is not liable for any legal action arising from the content of this program, including that awesome Smiths cover you just heard.
Yes, thank you.
My guest today is Tyler Farrell. And Tyler comes to us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Hometown.
Born and raised, technicality. You said you were
I grew up in West Ellis, okay. Yes. A fact that many people, point out. Although I spent most of my time in Milwaukee going to Market High, and then I was away for college, but then I went to UW Milwaukee to work with James Liddy, and so I spent a lot of time in Milwaukee as well. And now I live in Madison with my wife and two wonderful boys, and I teach at Marquette.
All right. That about sums it up. Thanks for coming.
Thanks. Good night.
All right. I know that you were educated in Nebraska. You went to high school here, but then you signed up to go off to Nebraska. Now, what when selecting a college, usually there's a bit of romanticism involved in the selection.
Yeah, definitely.
And you look at the brochure and you think to yourself, I can really envision myself in this place. What was it that made Nebraska?
Probably a few reasons. I went to a Jesuit high school, 4-year all-boys college preparatory high school, and so they, sort of try to steer you towards Jesuit colleges. Not everybody goes, but I liked Creighton in Omaha because it had a lot of programs, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at that point, and I just wanted something that was interesting and fun and had good teachers, and I thought that it did. And plus, I was toying. I think I always knew I was going to be an English major, but I was toying with other things. And
really?
Creighton at the time had sort of a pharmacy school and things like that, but that sort of ended after I think I was there my freshman year, and I decided that I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be an English major and write and stuff like that. And that's, you mentioned earlier, that's where I met Eamon Wall as well, who taught at Creighton for, I think, about 7 years maybe. Right. So he was there pretty much the whole time I was there, and then he left to go to St. Louis, and I left to go to UW Milwaukee to work with James. So
right. So had you met James prior to
I had, yes.
going here? So is it through Eamon then you were introduced?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I had heard his name a couple times, James, because being from Milwaukee and going to a lot of readings and things like that, you kind of find out who he is because he was, helped bring readings here and went to a lot of readings. In fact, the first time I heard his name, I think it was in 1988. There was a Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs reading actually at Marquette.
Oh, wow.
And I went to that with my brother and some of his friends, and somebody pointed him out to me, James, because he was instrumental in getting that reading to go, I think. And then in about 92, maybe 93, my freshman or sophomore year of college, I had been friends with Eamon for a while, and he said, "Oh, you're interested in poetry and Irish literature and stuff like that. Yeah. You should go get your master's, and then you should go work with James in UW Milwaukee." And so I met him one summer. I was over there for a summer school program through Creighton and
in Ireland.
In Dublin at Trinity, and then.
James was Trinity educated, wasn't he?
Well, no, he went to UCD.
He went to
actually
UCD,
in Dublin. Yeah. But he was there because Eamon had a class where he brought in people to talk, and James was one of them. And Eamon apparently must have said something about myself to James, because right after James finished talking that day during the class, he stood up and he said, "Oh, thank you for having me, and I would like to talk to anybody from Milwaukee," is what he said, and I stood up and went and talked to him, and then we went out for lunch and had a couple drinks, and then after that I think I was in Milwaukee again, and I called him to see if he wanted to get a drink or something, and he brought I went and met him and took my poetry with him and showed him some poetry, and then that was it. Then I finished at Creighton and I came here. So
that's great. So like the jump, it was kind of a seamless series of seamless transitions, really.
Yeah, really. I mean, it was. It's funny. I often think about how different my life might have been had I not actually gone to Omaha, Nebraska, for school, because I met Eamon, which then led me to James more, and it was, wonderful. I loved every second of working with James. I was at UWM for 4 years, and he was my advisor and a really, really great poet and a really excellent mentor as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's the thing that you get a lot of people that go through the level of education when you go to college and you go to graduate school and you're bumping into these poets and you're running into them. Not everybody is lucky enough after going through 8+ years.
Yeah.
I mean, you should be a doctor by now.
Yeah, exactly.
But, you just weren't studying the right thing.
I'm a doctor, just not a medical doctor.
Right. That's true. But you go through all this education. You don't always even find people that are as willing to mentor you.
Yeah.
And it's really great that you have two people, really, Eamon Wall and James Liddy, who were able to take that role.
Yeah, and I know students who would start a program somewhere to work specifically with one person, and then that person would leave because they would get another job somewhere else, and then you're sort of like, what am I going to do now? And so it was nice to have the stability of James too. Yeah.
I've heard of that too. That's just and the luckiness or the luck that is involved with running into those people. It's really something. So. You count those two as definite influences, probably in your writing. Are there any others outside people that you didn't work with or know?
Yeah. I mean, like more famous writers that I always come back to are a lot of Irish writers. I really love James Joyce. I think he's one of the best writers ever. I write poetry, but he's probably more famous for writing fiction. But most people think that his fiction is actually more poetic than anything. Frank O'Hara, I like, American poet, 1950s poet, New York poet. Lorraine Nidecker, kind of Wisconsin poet. Who else? A lot of Irish writers. I'm trying to think. I've been reading actually a lot on Lewis MacNeice, who is he was born in Northern Ireland actually, but he is sort of considered an Irish poet. He was friends with Auden and Spender and knew T.S. Eliot as well, and was considered to be a very good Irish poet for a very long time. And then he kind of was overshadowed, I think, by Auden. But now people are sort of paying more attention to him. I really love his work. His work is excellent. Who else can I tell you about?
Well, there's a bunch of people that influence probably Eamon and James that may have impacted as well, because those kinds of influences get shared.
Definitely. I found out a lot of really good writers from both of those two men. I remember James actually, one time I was getting really into certain Irish poets, and he, for my birthday, actually took me out to dinner, and he gave me a book of poems by Austin Clarke, and that was an Irish poet that I never heard of, and is now probably one of my favorite poets. He was kind of wrote a lot about religion and in his poetry, and he has a couple autobiographies as well that he talks a lot about. I thought it's odd for, I think, myself, who came from this very middle class West Dallas or Milwaukee background, to be obsessing about, with Irish writers of the last century, but I could really identify with Joyce, and I could really identify with Austin Clarke. There's all these great scenes in some of his books about, sort of not knowing what's going on when you go to church, and the strange thing in Ireland where you have sort of basically just Catholics and Protestants, and the differences between those, and I could really identify with it. I think people are kind of shocked by that. They think that I should probably be influenced by American writers, but I guess Irish writers impacted me more.
Well, you got to know one of them, obviously transplanted Liddy, and Eamon too.
Eamon, he was born Wexford, I think.
Wexford,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. So you had two Irish. That makes sense in a way.
Yes, true Anglophile, I guess I am. Or
how
something.
did you not end up living in Ireland at some point? Like our friend Mike.
That's actually something that I would love to actually do. I mean, I did that summer school program, and I spent time there. But yeah, I mean, I've never actually lived there for more than a few months, probably.
Right.
But yeah, maybe someday. Maybe I'll leave this strange country of ours and move to Ireland.
Where everything makes sense, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, exactly.
just paint it with this nice brush.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I think that I have a very, I don't know, kind of shiny view of Ireland because of the fact that every time I'm there, I'm on vacation.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not... I feel carefree because I don't really have a lot of responsibilities.
Troubles free?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I guess.
That was a pun.
Troubles free.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You have James passed away in 2008,
Mm-hmm.
and since then they've released several posthumous volumes, and they also came out with a selected book of selected poems.
Yep.
And you had the closing essay in that book.
Yes, I did. Me and John Redmond worked on that book. Nobody had put out a selected of James, and it mainly was because of the fact that when James was alive, he didn't really want to select it out because he wanted to move on. He wanted people to experience new poetry, and his last 5 or so collections are really proof of how good of a writer he was.
Yeah.
And those collections, I think, are so incredibly good, and he was still writing. But John Redmond approached me one day and just said, would you be interested in working on a selected? And I said, definitely, and I remember even at the launch for it, Alan Hayes, who published, he's the publisher, Arlen House, which published those last books, and he said that he asked James, why don't you do a selected sometime? And this is maybe about 6 months or a year before he died. And James said, over my dead body. That's what he said. And so literally, I mean, I think that's what happened is James probably wouldn't have allowed it when he was alive. But because of the fact that I think that now more people are going to need to know his writing, and that everybody looks to the selected, I think, when they look for a poet. His collected came out from Creighton in 1994, but that's
a long time ago.
Yeah.
Because the posthumous volumes, even, I mean, the things that came out after he passed away.
Exactly. He came out with
just
probably 10
magnificent.
books. Yeah.
They're so good, and they're so different from a lot of the things that he had been, that are in the collected,
That's
for
true.
example. So it's almost as though you needed to have that other...
the sort of selected. And we worked on it for about a year, and it went really well. And, John made a lot of the choices, and I made a few adjustments, and then he did the intro, and I did the bio at the end. And that was actually a really great writing experience because I know a lot about James, but I've never had to been forced to sit down and kind of write something in summation of him. And he had such an interesting life too. But I think that it's a good collection because it really should expose more readers to James.
Yeah.
I think so.
And that's the ultimate goal with any selected. And, I got it, and I think it's really quite good.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the Slovak bowling alley making it in was probably my favorite.
Well, and I wanted to make sure that poem was in there because I've always loved that poem. In fact, that was maybe one of the very first poems I'd ever read by James because when I first met him around the time, maybe I'd met him once before, but I was at this conference and he was doing something at it, and he gave me a copy of that book. And so that was really the first, sort of Liddy poems I'd ever read. And I think that Slovak bowling alley poem is just wonderful. And John Redmond actually did choose it, but I told him, I was like, I'm glad, because I said I would have thrown a stink if that poem wasn't in there,
That and the from the Art Is Not for Grown-Ups.
The Wisconsin one? Yeah. Oh. And that was one that I did sort of say we should really put this in because James was, he was born in Dublin, but he lived all over the U.S. and he lived, in parts of Ireland and stuff like that. But Milwaukee really became his kind of adopted city. And so that poem really sums up, I think, Wisconsin in general. In
some weird way, it does. It just is a nail on the head.
Yeah, and that's a poem that those short poems we didn't have a lot initially because they were so short. But I said I really would prefer to have this in it. John was like, yeah, sounds good.
And the Art Is Not for Grown-Ups poem or chap, however,
chapbook or Blue Canary. Yeah,
Blue Canary. I mean, it's hard to get some of those things out. You know what I mean?
It
so
is.
if you don't put them into a selected, you have to hope that at some point Blue Canary does like re-releases or something.
Yeah, and it's those were such small runs, and James had this sort of personal standpoint on them and stuff like that that I don't know if some of those poems probably will be lost if nobody else. That book is very hard to find too. Yeah. I mean, even if you just do a kind of a book finder.
He gave me a copy of it. I was really like, wow, this is amazing, and it's probably of all the things that he's written. Well, not all of them, but like it's one of the most influential in my writing, like personally, because I tend to write very abbreviated things.
It's very clever too.
It's so clever.
Yeah.
So. We should talk a little bit about your work.
Sure.
We get a chance. Yeah. I don't know if you wanted to do another Smiths cover to like segment the show up a little bit, but I don't really know any other Smiths songs.
I'm trying to think of something else here. Let me think. From a seat to a whirling waltzer, the skirt is sent for a watching eye. It's a hideous trait on a mother's side.
I don't know how the music is.
That's okay. If listeners haven't already could tell, I'm sort of obsessed with the Smiths, and James got me to sing Morrissey songs every once in a while. Did you ever hear that story? How that came about?
I didn't hear the story how that came about.
I was going to a conference with James, and he doesn't like listening to the radio really because it's full of a lot of bad, useless stuff.
Terrible music and bad advertising.
Yeah, exactly. And so we would talk a lot, like James loved to talk and I loved to talk with him and stuff like that. But every once in a while he would want to take a little nap. And so I didn't put music on. I would just start singing because I do it in the car anyway. And I kind of sing in the shower and stuff. And James was asleep and he woke up and was like, I hear angels singing, or something like that. and he was like, oh, what were you singing? And I said, oh, I was singing the Smiths song. And he's like, oh, I love Morrissey, And I thought, my God, this 70-year-old man who even knows who Morrissey is, I mean, and he would have me sing a few bars and we'd analyze the lyrics a little bit, and then and then there was one, he would always have lots of readings, and he called it the dessert because he did a reading and then I followed up with a few Smith songs. And from that point on, we'd be places, and he'd be like, oh, sing us a few bars of, some Smith song or something like that, And he even wrote a poem about it, actually, what's the name of that real long?
I only know strength. I love strength and my
friends in greatness. Yeah, there's a poem in there called "Not Being at Tyler's Reading" is the name of it, and it's about him sort of hoping for me to sing Morrissey at this reading and stuff like that. I don't really sing a lot of readings anymore, but every once in a while maybe. So
I drove with James up to Two Rivers once. That was the longest road trip I ever took with him, and the radio not being on. And I didn't have a CD player or anything. I couldn't, there's no bargaining in this exchange. Because he's like, I'll play the gas, but you mustn't put the radio on. And driving back from Two Rivers, I was, pinching myself, trying to stay awake. And, it was a really long trip.
Yeah.
That's like a 2-3 hour drive.
Yeah, exactly. And when you don't have any music or anything, it's fighting the boredom or something.
Yeah. So it's great if you're the passenger, but if you're the driver, you need something to hypnotize you into consciousness.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is the title of my next book. No, I'm just kidding. Hypnotize You into Consciousness by the Smiths.
That would be good.
So you have 2 books published, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. You have the Irish connection and comes out through your publisher. Actually, you are published by Salmon.
Yep.
And the first book, I remember the release reading. I think it was at. You did it at Irish Fest?
Yeah.
And I was there for that, and that was really cool. You have a little bit of a connection to Irish Fest too.
I do, yeah. I mean, I've been working at Irish Fest for the last, 8, 9, 10 years now. I mean, it's sort of volunteering basically, but you get a little ticket to get in, and I for a long time I helped judge the poetry contest that Nancy Walzak runs, and Jose Lanters is involved in that and stuff like that. And now it's mainly just sort of doing readings on Sunday. They have that sort of Irish Cultural Heritage Center, the Hedge School, exactly, and. Nancy usually emails me, every year and says, do you want to come and read some poems? And I said, definitely. And I always try to sort of read, this year I read a James poem, and I always read, various Irish poems that I like, and, and there's some other people there. Jose's usually there. And,
We all show up, a bunch of us.
You do. It actually is a lot of fun.
Because Sundays are free.
Yeah, that's right. You can get in with your canned food or whatever.
Before
for
Mass.
Mass. That's right.
You come in for Mass, you donate your canned food, and then they just let you wander the grounds. And if you got to go there with like a couple bucks on you, because you got to, first of all, you got to drink the Snake Chaser.
Yeah.
Because they don't have Guinness at Irish.
No, which is ridiculous. But
we have to lobby something. I don't know.
I think it has something to do with the fairgrounds.
It has to do with Miller.
Yeah, Miller. Exactly. Yeah.
But they do let the lakefront people on, which is so at least there's some good beer, but not in your comp tent with you.
I know exactly. I get some comp beers, but it's just usually like Miller Lite or something. Yeah.
It's punishment in a way.
I know.
Yes, you can have free beer,
but it's not very good. Yeah.
It's the dregs.
Yeah.
So and then so you just hang out all day and you eat morning buns and drink tea until Tyler reads. That's what Sundays are.
Well, thanks for coming, Keith.
It's always a great day, though.
I always have fun. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a good time. But the release for the first book, Tethered to the Earth.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to read a few pieces out of that, or if you.
Yeah, no, I will.
Great.
Yeah, this book came out in 2008. It was primarily written in northern Wisconsin when I was teaching up in Northland College, and so it's like kind of half about northern Wisconsin and half about Europe. The title "Tethered to the Earth" is, feeling like you're in a spot, but you're not really from there, and so you feel a bit like you're floating on the outside of it and stuff. And Salmon was, the Salmon Publishing, Jesse Lendenny runs it, and it's based near the Cliffs of Moher, and I met her through James, and I had been publishing things here and there in little magazines and things like that, and James suggested that I submit a manuscript, and so when I finished it, I did it, and then 6 months went by and I didn't hear anything, and I thought, that's it, I'll probably try to shop this around again or something. But then out of the blue one day she wrote me and said she wanted to meet, and that was it. And so I like this book, and I have a sort of fondness for it because it was my first book, but I also sometimes read some of them and kind of cringe because I'm like, oh God, I'm such a better poet than that now, aren't I? I hope. I don't know, maybe I am. So
do you ever go back and correct them?
I do.
I've seen one of my favorite examples of it, Carl Gartung, who runs Woodland Pattern. He had his book come out, and it's a really good book, but he had gone through and put pieces of paper with better versions of poems that were in there. On the day of the release.
Wow, that's hilarious.
And as far as I could tell, there weren't punctuation errors or spelling errors. It was purely stylistic choices. And I was like, that's a commitment.
Yeah,
to the cause. Yeah. And he, I talked to him afterwards. I had a monograph, and he's like, probably gonna have to fix a few of these. Come on back.
I think that happens. I mean, I was younger when I wrote this book too, and I think that it really stems from the idea that you want to release something very good and that's put a lot of work into, but at some point you got to finish it. You have to get it to the publisher. They got to print it. And so but you evolve as a poet throughout life. So
sure.
But there's certain things I would change, but there's definitely things that I would keep the same. So here, let me read one poem. This is called Letter from Madeline Island. It's Madeline Island is an island just off the Bayfield Peninsula in northern Wisconsin. It's part of the Apostle Islands, actually, which is
it's the only one that has dirt roads that are open to the public or something.
Yes, exactly. Like you can take cars over there and stuff like that. I've
been there twice in my life.
Oh, really?
It's great. The ferry ride over there is amazing. And if you go into the gift shops, they have these. I don't know what else to say. They're just clay balls from the bottom of Lake Superior.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And I used to keep those, and I used to twirl them around in my hand like Captain Queeg or something.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's a really beautiful area, and it makes you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. James used to refer to it as I was living in Siberia. That's what he thought of it. But Madeline Island is very pretty, and it's very laid back. And I wrote this because it actually takes place in this bar there. It's called Tom's Burn Down Cafe is the name of it, and it used to be a bar that literally did burn down, and then they just sort of put tarps over it. It's kind of an indoor-outdoor bar.
Okay.
And it's this really unique place. Like everything's in cans, and beer in cans, and coolers, and things like that. And people gather, and they have showers there, so you can pay $2 to take a shower if you're out camping, and you stop at Tom's Burn Down Cafe.
Nice.
And so I was there once with my wife, and I wrote this poem sort of shortly after that. So this is called Letter from Madeline Island. If I were sick once again, I would think of long lighted days stuck with you on the island, opening can after can of Miller High Life, to tell stories of the frozen ponds at the back of your house, the stumbling uncle from your wedding reception, an old friend whom you no longer talk to. You played old tunes on a jukebox and stood around waiting to be asked to dance. Rotten, odd moments like complaints or fly-by-night religions or talk of the weather chill outside. Last year's frozen spout on top of the water treatment tank, with strange stains on its bald feet and rounded silver, and bulging primer coat layered in the thickness from a young boy's heavy shaken hands. There's an old motel on Bayfield Peninsula. It smells of trout and aged whiskey. The owner is a merciless woman with holes in her slippers and a cigarette hanging from a half-opened mouth, lipstick on the filter, nicotine stains on her knuckles. She hobbles to our room with glasses of ice, seltzer water, a bucket with extra pillowcases, more dry towels. She once played trombone with the Sweethearts of Rhythm and married the owner of this land. He built her a motel, told her to run it while he flew around the continent, creating new ways for her to hate him. I scrawl a note on a napkin and tape it to my leg. It is an outline of a plan to meet you again on the island, a dream of long-distance swimmers struggling toward the sand and rock of its southern tip, where the post office sits with white painted boards as the small plot of land it rests on erodes further into the lake. Maybe I will bitterly move away from here. The loss from back home, the cabin sunsets, the isolation even for birds. There is a staggered wind, a reminder to crouching farmers. There is no rest from a wicked life. Even this small land fastened to the lake could never float away like a piece of driftwood caught on a heavy wind and northern wave. We are the stationary ones. We are like islands, free from the mainland, still tethered to the earth.
Nice. Worked in the title at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the title of this book I had forever. I mean, like I kind of thought of it and wanted to work it into a poem, and I think that's kind of where this poem came from. So
yeah, I enjoy it. Anytime somebody is able to effectively romanticize something about the Northwoods, I just support it. I instinctively support that.
I think you should.
It's probably
being
because
a Wisconsinite.
Yeah, you just have to write about the Northwoods at some point, but you can't. You got to leave out some of the nastier bits.
Yes,
but,
it's very magical, but there's also kind of a dark side behind it too. But there's also, I don't know, I find it wonderful.
Yeah.
I mean, my 2 years up at Northern College were wonderful because the people were great and the beauty that's around you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
magnificent to get out and just among the pines.
Mm-hmm.
Just, that's what it is. That's all there is.
Exactly.
You're just surrounded, and you may, even if you're on. Which up until like the 90s, my grandparents had a farm up there that I used to visit in Park Falls, Wisconsin.
Oh yeah, okay.
Price County.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, there was still on a dirt road.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Up until the 90s, so it was just like this dirt road and pine trees kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
And, if you go around northern Wisconsin, UP, I don't know how many dirt roads are left, but there's enough of them probably that you can still find that just a little bit of, I don't know what you would call it, like naturalism.
Yeah, it's really good too, and it's like the theme of this book, or one of the main themes, was isolation, because you do feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's so remote, and it's so, there's not a lot of people up there. So
the relationships that the students who are kind of coming through there on a almost temporary basis, the culture's got to be a little bit different for them, even.
Yeah.
So. I mean, I don't know. I haven't spent a lot of time up there like that, but I think there's stories about people sunbathing in the quadrangles.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there's a lot. It's a little freer, probably,
Which is interesting. You don't always associate the rural parts of this state or this country of ours with being more lax and relaxed and everything.
But it's interesting, though, too, because if you look actually at, like, political maps or whatever, the blue parts of the state, though, are Milwaukee, Madison, and northern Wisconsin. There's like sort of Ashland, I mean, so, like, it's definitely, but it's also because the college is, it's a 4-year private liberal arts college. It has an environmental mission. There's majors to, work in the woods, basically, and so students really go there because they want to do something like that, and it's a very unique place, I mean, so it used to be a little bit bigger too. It's kind of getting a little smaller, but I think that maybe they're on their way back up though too, so we'll see.
Well, if you had another piece from Tethered to the
Sure. Out of this one, yeah. Let me think. I haven't read very much out of this. for a while. Let me read you this one. This one's called Transporting a Cow to the Mainland, and this is actually, I put this in the first section of the book because it actually has to do with an island, the Blasket Islands, which are kind of on the southwest part of Ireland. I was reading this book. There's a lot of memoirs about the Blasket Islands, and they were talking about how, people still live on the islands year-round, and they raise animals, and every once in a while you have to take a cow to the mainland to sell it.
Yeah.
And I thought that's such a great idea for a poem, and the fact that you transport one cow via like a boat, like a dinghy, is just, it seems absurd to me. I mean, like, you would think that the cow would fall in or something, so this is called Transporting a Cow to the Mainland. A third day of island mooring rumpled, watered by rains as thick as the sea, every soul in ripple-soaked and limped lighthouses with a cracked window warning. No cheer and shifter of home, the cunning weather had kept us in sensible rabble, a crest above the strand. The men stood with donkeys ready to trade, a goat or two, a basket of fish, a sack of wool, pigs and chickens, the boats on the quay, a sailor to Dingle Bay. My 3 uncles, myself, my sister's husband were at halt on a clifftop, a price for a drink, a trade, the slaughter for another minute like a battle ended with a bit of rascal luck, a scarecrow instead of a man. I saw a butcher kick a sheep stone dead. He then took a knife from his pocket and let out her blood, wrung her heart. We left the cow in the morning, and breakfast with the traders was a shop like gulping itself down so we could leap back to the island with more whiskey, a shilling more than a pound. The crew had melted like the foam on a river, the shame of the rest. I sent a blessing for 6 pennyworth. A week from today would be the same. The whole blessed world was then.
And you kind of bounce back between Ireland and Wisconsin in that book a lot, and it's 2 parts to that book. As I remember.
Yeah.
I've left my copy at home.
No, that's okay.
Every time it rains, this is what happens to me. By the way, I just forget everything. But yeah, the 2 parts to that book is kind of focusing on being out in Ireland and in the world. There's poems where you're in Spain, I think.
Yes, there is a few. Yes, because the second half of that book is more. It's about Ireland, but it's also about Europe because my wife and I spent about 5 weeks in Europe that summer, and so we traveled to. We were in Spain for a while, Portugal, France, England, Ireland, and then we came home. So, and that poem is actually it's very. I don't know. I loved reading. I love reading about Ireland, but I also try to find these ways that they are kind of connected to this rural aspect of Wisconsin. And so, I have an uncle that's a farmer outside of Madison, and dairy farmer, lots of cows, and so I could see some of the things I was reading in that book on the Blasket Islands similar to my uncle. Not that they have to take a cow somewhere to go sell it via boat, but the whole rural aspect of Ireland is very similar to the rural aspect of Wisconsin, and so I wanted to sort of make that connection, and that poem is very, it's trying to be kind of nostalgic too for the idea that this is something you had to do back in those days, like there wasn't the global economy that's going on right now and stuff like that, getting a cow onto a boat and taking it to the mainland is really your only source of income, right. So it's kind of interesting, Yeah,
the tying in between the Wisconsin and Ireland thing kind of fits the theme of your life to a certain extent.
Definitely.
Have you found yourself like moving away from that, or do you still get a lot of time in? Do you still visit Ireland?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I try to go over there once every few years. Okay. I was there now, I think a year ago or 2. I was thinking of going this summer, but I'm not really sure yet. But yeah, I mean, I still know people there, and obviously my publisher's there, so I like to go see her, and of course, I mean, Jim goes over there still, and other people, and so it's nice to get away for a couple weeks and go to Ireland because I love it. So, I mean, I love other parts of Europe as well, but Ireland still is very magical to me or something like that. And I still do write about it. I mean, I think that my first book and my second book are probably a little bit more influenced than the thing I'm working on right now, but every few months I always come back to something about Ireland, probably, right, I mean, because I like their writers, I like the inspiration of the country, I don't know, being nostalgic about it, to a certain degree, so yeah. The Jim, by the way, that you mentioned is Jim Chapson, who is the apparently I was actually doing this count the other day. Jim's ahead of you by I think 2 issues.
for most
Burdock?
for most appearances in Burdock magazine.
Well, that's good.
I hadn't realized that you had snuck into so many issues. I don't know who's on the editing board.
I don't either. Who is that?
Who's that guy that makes these calls? But
yeah, well, and Jim's work is very good. I mean, I really like Jim's writing.
I love
stuff.
Jim. I always try to see if he's up for it, and it's always good to have pieces by poets that kind of form a backbone to some magazine, even regular contributors. And I found that the people that I know through Liddy kind of have become my regular contributors.
I bet, yeah.
Kind of kind of putting the spine in the thing, and then having different people kind of interacting with that. And so the which leads me kind of to the second book that you had come out, The Land of Give and Take. How many poems in that book were in Burdock? That's the question.
Oh God, a lot. 5, 6, 7. I don't know.
Stroke the ego here.
I'd have to go back and count, but definitely, the after party one and some of those shorter ones that are in there and stuff. I mean, it's funny too, because every time I send you poems, Keith, I usually send you 4 or 5, and you always pick the one that I would have picked. So I commend you on that. You have a good taste.
Yeah, right. It's probably who taught us. It's just
I mean, I think that you're right about that whole thing. I mean, I met a lot more writers once I met James. I mean, you're just sort of surrounded by him, or because he had so many students, and he knew so many writers and stuff like that.
It's a different world in some regards.
It really is.
You just suddenly all the outside stuff just falls away, and there's this focus on the community of writers and not all the other BS really.
Yes. See, and that's the thing, is that it's not really academic. It's I mean, like, I know writers because of going to conferences and things like that, but that's different than knowing sort of writers like James or Jim or some of their friends, because they're not. I don't think that they're writing because they're like trying to make their way in academia. They're writing because they're good writers. They like writing, and that was something that really opened my eyes about writing when I knew that. I mean, I thought that you would. Going to get a PhD meant that you had to become this academic that was constantly writing articles and and trying to submit to things like the New Yorker or something like that. And I didn't think that I could compete with that. But then when I found other writers who were really good writers and very devoted to it, but they did it more differently, I was like, well, that's it. I want to do that. I want to, I want people to like my writing. I write because it's it's coming out of me, and because I want to express myself, but I'm not doing it because I want academic accolades. It's because I think that I have something to say, and people might want to read it. Maybe, I mean, depending. But
you just have to hope for, at the very least, even if you play the game, so to speak, and you're able to, kind of exist in that world. It's not necessarily. It breaks down so strangely. I talk to people about this every so often. Even within that world, there are cliques, and the breakdowns fall that way too. And so, like, to some extent, you almost can't bank on, getting into that sort of lifestyle and having it work out for you as even socially, much less professionally. You have to sort of be true to yourself.
Very true.
And you cannot, you can't expect things to unfold a certain way just because you abide the rules and conform to everything.
Yeah, no, you're right about that.
Which is, kind of what I learned from James was to kind of how to avoid conforming to some extent.
I agree. Yeah. No, you're right.
There's just so many ways to go with regard to getting accepted into programs and this and that.
Yeah.
Like you said before, you go for maybe one person who's there and then they leave, sort of thing, and then you're just this island unto yourself in this program where nobody cares what you have to say or anything like that, and you almost can't do it. You have to go with the expectation of either an all-around acceptance or the fact of I am this strong and I will exist on my own, and I will find like-minded people wherever I go. And you kind of
definitely.
You have to feel that to some extent. So.
Yeah, and the whole time, I was just trying to make my writing better. I mean, I just wanted to, keep learning and keep packing information in and trying to get something out that was, meaningful. So.
Sure. Well, speaking of getting your writing better, let's read something out of the better book, right?
The new
now.
book,
the new book.
Yes. And I do feel like it is like I've I turned a corner or something. I think.
Is that a Kyle Fitzpatrick cover?
It is Kyle Fitzpatrick. It's funny because I actually saw your book has got a picture of Kyle's on it too, doesn't it? I told Jim this.
I think this is part of the Liddy realm. We just started getting Kyle Fitzpatrick to do covers for all of us.
Well, and it's funny too because like with my first book, I have a friend of mine, Doug Kepsel, who's a really good artist, and I wanted him to do the first cover, and he did a great job. I think on my first book.
Cover.
It is really nice. And he had spent some time in northern Wisconsin too, so that's why I really wanted him to do it.
Yeah.
And then I wanted something new and different for the second book, and I immediately thought of Kyle because I think his stuff is so shocking, kind of striking, and so I think it actually came out of the fact that I was having a discussion with somebody at a conference about how judging a book by its cover is sort of a misnomer because, like, in fact, there are a lot of people out there that will pick up a book based on its cover. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Like, and open it because the cover is so interesting or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, well, maybe if I
think what we're all doing is banking on Kyle becoming famous.
Yeah.
And then people like buying our books because it has a Kyle Fitzpatrick
exactly,
cover.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to.
I think you're right, yeah. Well, and it's interesting, too, because, Begnell has a picture of Kyle's on his book,
Begnell
too,
does,
I think.
and Jim's got one.
And Jim's got it,
Liddy had some, so it's like, there's a bunch of us out there. I'm sure there's others that
Kyle, there is probably some others.
Kyle's over in... Kyle spent his time in Berlin. Is he still in Berlin?
I think he is. I mean, I haven't talked to him in a while since we sort of were dealing with this cover, but he was emailing me from Berlin when I was talking to him. So
when I was talking to him about selecting a cover, that's where he was still. So I don't know. I don't know how long he's going to be there. But at some point, I want to see a German poet come out with a book that has a Kyle cover on.
Yeah, that would be.
That's
great.
what I'm ultimately looking forward to.
Yeah, that's great. Here, I'll read a few poems from this book. This book was, took me a while to write, and I had been sending out poems for a long time, and it kind of fell together, though. I mean, like, a lot of the themes in this book are religion, of course. I read a lot about Catholicism, but also, sort of relationships, love or lust, sort of the as Jim says on the back of this book, the conflicted Catholicism that I'm writing about. There's a lot of poems in here about other authors, Austin Clarke, James Liddy, Laurie Nidecker. I like to write poems about other poets because I feel like I've gotten so much from them. But let me start with, this is a poem actually this is one of the first poems I wrote for this book. I was invited to be on a discussion about, this is ages ago now, but it was about that author who had a book published through Oprah's book club. It's called A Million Little Pieces.
I forgot his name.
Is it James Frey or
Fry?
Fry, I think.
Like
something. I think it's spelled Frey, Frey, but I think he pronounces it Fry. But
just so that he can get the Futurama rub.
Yeah, and
Sorry.
and like, basically I was on the side of the fact that I thought that memoir was sort of, putting the title nonfiction on something is sort of strange to me because of the fact that even a nonfiction book still has a bit of exaggeration in it. I mean, it's still that person's perspective. If another person was witnessing the same thing, they might have a different way to say it anyway. Mm-hmm. But everybody got all up in arms about this, because, Oprah felt she was duped. And ironically, though, I think the book sold like a million copies.
Sold very well.
Well, it sold 1 million copies before the
million little copies.
Yeah, and 1 million little copies, and then after the controversy hit, it sold 2 million copies. So I mean, I don't think it hurt him at all.
I still haven't read it. I haven't either. I feel like I'm so out of the loop. How did you sit on a conference?
Well, because it was more a panel.
You read selected pieces?
Yeah, I did, and it was more about, I read specifically the parts that were contested as being true or not true.
Oh, okay.
And it was more about discussing sort of truth in literature, truth in nonfiction and stuff. And so I wrote this poem because I thought, I don't know, we had a kind of a pre-meeting about it with some of the people, and I didn't think I was expressing myself as well as I could, and so I came back to my office and I wrote this poem. It's called The Truth of Angels and Ravens. If you've ever read an autobiography of an angel, you know they first kiss every page, then let them float bound with white hair in the morning mist of sunshine until they drop into the mailbox of God. If God rejects the submission, for he gets far more than he can possibly publish, he summons a raven to collect the words, the small symbols for mankind to decipher, and ties them to a black feathered back with golden string made from stolen ingots confiscated from Wall Street embezzlers and big business brokers. lives. Then the raven swoops down to earth and drops the manuscript at a bus stop or train depot or alleyway in Brooklyn to watch the winds blow like wind waves, or the words blow like wind waves of everyday lives. And that is how we know angels write quite exaggerated prose about the possibility of their existence.
Did you write that before or after the crash?
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity. I can't remember when the James Frey thing broke, but that's a... Wow. Yeah, we should have you back on at some point just to do another panel on that, because I know Begnall talked a little bit about it.
Oh, he did?
Not on the show when he came on, but he and I had discussed it once or twice.
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting point of conversation, really, because a lot of poets write things that are very autobiographical, but you have to be ornate and occasionally flowery, or in some cases, if you're a conceptual writer, you leave big pieces out.
Yeah. Well, and I had a writing teacher in college actually tell me, she said, don't ruin anything by just telling the truth.
Sure.
You know, I mean, I think that we are kind of I tend to embellish a lot. My wife can attest to this, that I tell stories sort of, I make them better, you know, in my opinion. But
my wife thinks I'm a liar.
Well, I don't think that's true. No. But I think that anybody is sort of, even when you're writing a nonfiction, you know, and underneath that, there's still a certain sense of you want it to be an interesting story, and
sure.
You want people to kind of get something out of it. And I think they could if you just wrote it straight, but they wouldn't get as much if you don't. You know, there's all these, if you didn't exaggerate, there's all these kind of things about it. John Ford, who was an American filmmaker, he said, you know, if you have the choice to film the truth or the fiction, always film the fiction. You know, I mean, because it's much more interesting. You know, so
unless there's a chance, you know. Well, never mind.
There's probably exceptions to that rule.
I have so many politically incorrect thoughts running through my head just now.
I bet you do.
We do try not to swear on the riverwestradio.com.
Yeah, that's good.
We're training ourselves for an FM license down the road.
That's nice.
My next... Tethered to the Earth kind of explained, the title kind of comes from the people, the poems kind of being bound to place.
Yeah.
And be that Ireland or Wisconsin or someplace in Europe.
Very
Where
much
did you get
so.
the title for the second?
The Land of Give and Take is actually, that phrase has been going through my head for a long time, because I read this article a very long time ago. This is probably when I was in high school. I get obsessed with certain musicians, and at one point in my life I was very obsessed with Elvis Costello, and I still really love him as a musician, but he released this album called Imperial Bedroom, and for a while the working title of it was The Land of Give and Take. Okay. And so I you know, and he never used that title. He ended up calling it Imperial Bedroom instead. And I was always fascinated with that. And when I was writing this book, and I kind of had some basic ideas, general ideas about what I wanted to write about and certain things I knew I was going to cover, I thought it worked out perfectly, because the book is sort of about the give and take of sort of life and religion and love. You know, I mean, the things you do in those situations to justify your actions, or to, you know, feel bad when something doesn't go your way, though, either. You know, I mean, it's life is sort of this pull, you know, I mean, give and take. You know, you make negotiations with your family, with your work, with your, you know, whatever is surrounding you. And I felt that kind of pull greatest in the themes of some of these poems, which really did include religion and love and relationships and, you know, things that there was this kind of give and take all the time, you know, and I thought that the title could be a little bit more complex than just The Land of Give and Take, but I think that it expresses the theme of this book quite well, and so that's why I used it.
Okay. Well, why don't you give us another one?
Sure. Let me see. How about... Since
we'll close with an Elvis Costello cover.
Oh, okay.
Or if I can think of any.
I can maybe sing one too. Let me read this one. This is called Mass in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. This is about my mother-in-law. My wife's family is very, very Catholic and, you know, extremely devoted. And my mother-in-law, Cece, is very good at, you know, getting people together for Mass on Saturday night or Sunday morning, and the kind of ritual of it. And they have this kind of ritual, and I don't go to Mass very much anymore, which is kind of what this poem is about. But it came out of the idea that when we were up north at their cabins in Rice Lake, even when we're at the cabins, we got to go to church. And so they get ready for it. So it's called Mass in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. My mother-in-law knows all the angles when it comes to negotiating Saturday night mass schedules and times. Even without running water, she still looks pure and virginal, readying herself to pray for all the sinners in her life, including myself. Her husband always says she hasn't met a kneeler she didn't like. And the kids pile out of the car. I grab my book and head for the Saturday pizza place while the rest sit through a long mass filled with songs and words, the old people standing, then sitting in trance, ladies in white robes, voices from the choir loft as the priest clears his throat and adjusts his microphone. Before I leave, she says to me, I think we'll get out in an hour, but you never know with confirmation season. So I sit in the pizza place, drinking a beer, reading my book, while waiting for someone to complain that I have 12 seats saved for the Catholics on their way for reward. Lord only knows when they will arrive.
Okay. I that's one of my favorite ones in that book, actually.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
There's something about going to Mass, because if you're Catholic and you know that you can go to Mass in Milwaukee, and the vibe and the homilies especially are completely different.
Oh, definitely.
But you're still essentially going to the same service out in Rice Lake or Five Fields.
You're right. You're still getting your obligation in, and and we usually go to the anticipatory mass, which is Saturday nights rather than Sunday morning, and And
then you get a definite different spin because the people that get assigned the priests that get assigned to parishes. In the city they're just of a different ilk.
They are
than the
country. The rural priest, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting too because I was just reading this article by Graham Greene, an essay by Graham Greene. And he was wrote a lot about Catholic themes, and he actually converted to Catholicism. I think he was raised Protestant, kind of Church of England.
The writer, not the
the writer,
not the actor,
not the
Dances with Wolves.
Exactly, no, the writer. He wrote one of my favorite novels actually, just called The Power and the Glory, which is a beautiful, beautiful novel. But I was just reading this essay by him, and he said something like, I suppose every Catholic has his favorite type of priest, and I thought that was perfect. That sort of because you're right, the city priest is different than the country priest, and so
we got like 3 minutes left.
Sure.
Do you have any new poems that you'd like to read?
Let me read.
Because I know you have things that you are working on currently.
Yeah.
And I don't know, do you put manuscripts together first, or do you kind of?
No, I usually just write for a few years, and I do a lot of writing where I write stuff that I know is not really ever going to see the light of day, though. Either I just write and I try to keep up with writing, and then after a few years, I keep kind of files of these poems on my computer or on my flash drive, and I just go through and start pulling out poems that I think would work, that are pretty solid, pretty good, and I start to try to rearrange them, and that's kind of how a book surfaces. Right. This book, though, my first book seemed much easier, at least, or I think it was because I was writing on two kind of main themes, and so it was easy to kind of put those into a manuscript. This book went through so many changes. Like even if you ask my publisher Jessie, the version that she saw before the final version was quite drastic. I was making a lot of changes, especially within the last 6 months. But let me read you let's see, what new one should I read? Here, I'll read this one. This is called The Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, King of France. I read this at Irish Fest. I just got this published, and I really quite like it. I was in New Orleans, and I love that city so much because of the fact that it's so very kind of historical and religious and Catholic, but it's also very decadent at the same time. And so, strip clubs and things like that. And so I wrote this, when I was sitting down next to Café du Monde one day, and so it's called the Cathedral Basilica / Basilica of St. Louis, King of France, which is the main sort of Catholic cathedral right down, in the French Quarter. All souls in New Orleans are beautiful. When the mist serves us heavenly air, trapped on wet streets, the park noises, young artists wash feet with a little fountain water. We crawl along black brick, long cracked streets aimed at the Mississippi. Fog like smoky faces, unbound wishes, humid people, lives eyeing around the quarter for anyone to tell us about the parties, the great restaurants, the crowded bars and discreet strip clubs. All the rewards, complete test and happiness. If we could live in this parish forever, we could be truly happy our entire lives. Then a wedding opens chilled cathedral doors with smells of an ordination at the Vatican. Gray marble and incense intoxicates, honors the crowd. Union, heat throb, Christ. Sounds draw us near the ground in reverence, kneeling beneath the sun and crescent moon, our minds now unclouded, sins confessed. Forgiveness is a city of saints, Lewis singing a song for St. Joseph. He sings also for the sinners, Bourbon Street window swingers, bad barkers next to three-card Monte dealers near Café du Monde, where a homeless man hit on me as we sat on black iron benches in the park with the Civil War cannon, model 1861 Parrott rifle. He said I had real fair skin and I was sweating. Beignet powdered sugar fell everywhere. I smiled, listened, chatted with him for a time about artillery and pirates, about the Jack's Brewery, voodoo. Then I went and had a few beers at the brewery, stumbled back to the basilica with other flaming hearts, looked skyward. We prayed, recited plaque history, visitations, always pondering a pilgrimage to another bar, revelation love from local parishioners, indulging the way sinners often indulge.
All right. Beautiful.
Thanks.
Where did you get that published?
It was in Burning Bush too.
Burning Bush too. Okay.
Yeah, and then
put a link. I'll put a link up to that and
do that
on the riverwestradio.com
Excellent.
site for Burdock Radio. I gotta sign off today, but thank you very much, Tyler, for coming by.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Thanks for reading some really lovely poems and really good chat. So
thank you.
What Elvis Costello song do we both know?
I don't know.
I cannot think of anything off the top of my head.
I was thinking of
what's his most famous tunes?
Oh God, Allison maybe, or do you know that song? No, I was thinking of like, have you heard the song Less Than Zero? It goes like, call him Mr. Ozzo with the swastika tattoo. There is a vacancy waiting in the English voodoo wanna.
Okay, that's good enough.
That was good.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Guest next week is Paul Vogel, so come on back.
Go Paul.